Hello and welcome to the next edition of our In Conversation With series, where we've been exploring collective worship and spiritual development within Church of England schools. My name is Ryan Parker and I'm the RE and Christian Ethos Advisor for the Diocese of St Albans, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Ronni Lamont. Ronni, hello.
Hi there.
Ronni, I'm so delighted that you could join us. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
I started my working life as a secondary science teacher a very long time ago. And from there, I moved on to be a dance teacher. Then I went off to theological college to train for ordination. And I was in parish ministry, including two parishes in St Albans Diocese. And then I moved on to Rochester Diocese. And now I work freelance as a consultant, looking at spirituality, but mainly focused on children and young people's spirituality. Got two grown-up kids. And I live in Kent, which is very pretty at this time of the year. And we have some wonderful lambs. So, that's me. Mm.
Thank you, Ronni. And I'm really thrilled personally that you're able to contribute to this series, because I know you come with a wealth of wisdom and expertise, both from your professional work, but also from your research as well. So I'm looking forward to what you're able to share with our schools and our teachers today. So this session, we're looking at spirituality and how, as schools, we can support the spiritual development of all pupils. I know from my perspective, spirituality and spiritual development has been something which has really interested me. It formed part of my undergraduate degree. It was my thesis. And actually, as I've looked at it year on year since, as I moved away from, my degree to becoming a teacher and now advisor, those questions remain kind of perennial. And it's something which I'm reflecting and building on my knowledge and understanding as I go through. And as educators, we're tasked, we have the privilege to contribute to the social, moral, cultural, and spiritual development of our school community. And particularly with the new science evaluation schedule, there's a stress placed, isn't there, on that notion of spiritual development and spirituality. And the question or the statement, I'll read it now, is: to what extent do schools have a clear and secure understanding of spiritual development that's distinguishable from social, moral, cultural, and is shared by staff? And I think they're important questions to grapple with, and quite often a bit tricky. Spirituality eludes definition in many senses. But I know that I've drawn a lot from reading many of your works. So I wonder, from your perspective, what do you understand by spirituality? And kind of the side question, why is it important to think about it seriously in schools?
If we were doing this as a workshop in a school, that would be the first thing that I would get people to talk about, because I think spirituality is a word that everybody thinks they know what it means, but they rarely check it out with other people. So I've got an understanding of what I mean by spirituality. But if I was doing a similar session, say, with ordinands who are going to be vicars, they would root their spirituality very much in the Christian faith. Whereas I actually believe that spirituality is probably the essence of what makes us truly human. There's an amazing book by a woman called Lisa Miller called The Spiritual Child. It's very big. It's a bit of a doorstop. But she says it's the link between our heart and our heads. And I really like that. Rebecca Nye says it's relational consciousness. It's being aware that there is more to life than the physical side of life. So it brings in love and our emotional selves, but it also brings in the ability to relate to other people. And as a Christian, I would say our ability to relate to the other. Obviously, as Church of England schools, we're dealing with all faiths and none. And children with atheist children still are spiritual beings. And I think recently what's been really interesting with the emphasis on mental health coming through the pandemic is I think a healthy spirituality really, really enables resilience, and it enables self-belief. And one of the things I'm really finding myself thinking about at the moment is how do we equip parents to enable the spirituality in preschool children. And there's an organisation at Christchurch Uni in Canterbury who are looking at, where's the spirituality in a toddler group? Not with the mums and the dads and the carers, but what's going on in the kids at that age? Because I believe it's something very elusive, but it's present. And I think the most obvious place that we see it is when we're working with children and they say something or they do something, and it just makes your heart glow, which sounds terrible, but everybody knows what I mean. That's why people stick at school and why they stick at being a church worker or whatever. It's because children give back more than we give to them. So it's about those relationships and those magic moments that for children, they're not thinking about it. This is just what came out. But for adults, we tend to go into, oh, I need to go into spiritual mode. You see it in church because the first thing people do is, they walk into church, they say good morning, and then they kneel down and do a little huddle, which is getting into spiritual mode. But for children, it's just present all the time. And I think that children have an enormous amount to teach us about living in the moment and being present in the moment. And that's where we see their spirituality.
Amazing. I think it's, as you say, it's such a fascinating area, isn't it? And I think as we grow older, there is the risk that we can't compartmentalize what is spiritual versus what isn't spiritual, or spiritual moments again against unspiritual moments yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, Ofsted have a really interesting description of it in their handbook, their inspector's handbook, and it involves imagination and creativity and being able to listen to somebody else's point of view and take it on board and not say, no, that's wrong, but to say, oh, that's something interesting that I hadn't thought about. It's about expanding horizons and being with people. To be honest, if the adults that we dealt with had read the Ofsted inspector's definition of spirituality, life in school would be a lot easier. But it's very broad and it doesn't involve religion. And I think that's the key thing, is that spirituality is there even when there's nothing religious going on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ronni. I think it's a really fascinating area. And when we're thinking about spirituality, particularly within Church of England schools, it's coming back to the evaluation schedule. It's got that statement of how well can we support all pupils, and indeed I'd add staff to that, in their spiritual development in a way that enables all to flourish. And for me, it's in terms of my thinking, as I've kind of got on and reflected, it's become ever more clear for me that everyone has their own unique spirituality. And indeed, it's, our spirituality is as unique as our own fingerprints. And, for me, I feel that kind of sense of that connection that you were talking about. Often for me, it's when I'm going for a run. It might be when I'm also outside doing a bit of walking. It might be a time just to read, or even, I know I really find that sense of connection, a real sense, it's quite a powerful moment when I'm reading a prayer in church. And it's one that I know has been said for centuries. It's like, wow, this has been echoed in this place by millions across the world, at various times and places. But I also know that what works for me in having that kind of spiritual succor and that sense of connection with God or with others isn't necessarily the case for others. And it really came to the fore when I was at a meeting with various other school leaders, and we're asked to spend a bit of time in silence. I think it was about 10 minutes or so. And I hated it. I was thinking about, what's going to have for dinner. I was really distracted. But others next to me found it such a powerful moment. So that got me starting to think about, well, everyone has their own spirituality. And in my own practice in school, am I catering for those that I feel have a similar spiritual temperament to myself, perhaps, subconsciously, or am I keeping it broad to enable all to develop spiritually? So I wonder for you, in your experience, again, in the evaluation schedule, it says we offer the opportunity without compulsion for all pupils and adults to grow spiritually through experiences of prayer, stillness, worship, and reflection. So in your opinion, how might schools start to think about those questions in collective worship?
I'm going to just talk about the work of a couple of people now then. Rebecca Nye, who wrote a book called Children's Spirituality, What It Is and Why It Matters, has a little acronym, I think you call them, for how faith can be enabled to flourish. And it goes, it's spirit. So the first thing that you have to give is space. Now, for some children, that needs to be outside space. And it's space in terms of the physical space that you're located within, but it's also space in terms of time, because the P is process. And you can't have a learning objective with spirituality. You cannot rush it. It happens when it happens. There is no end point. So the whole idea of spirituality developing is quite a difficult concept for me. Just being present is what spirituality is about. And you don't get better spirituality or worse spirituality. It's just there. And then she goes on to talk about intimacy, relationships, trust. And there's another I, imagination. And I think you need to give an enormous space and variety of materials for kids to work with, for all kids to be able to access their spirituality. So I'm a great believer in outside prayer spaces, which are not prescriptive, just a space where kids can go and be in the garden and just be in the air, because for some children that's really important. The other one is David Sinos, which is spelled Csinos, who's Canadian. And he did some research about 10 years ago now on what he called spiritual styles, talking to children in small groups about how they accessed their spirituality within the context of what I will call a Sunday school group. And he said there are 4 different ways that children and adults approach their spirituality and access it, really. And so some people do it through words, through very clearly described prayers. And because actually the English educational system really goes for the word style people, you don't have to worry about them during an act of collective worship, because you will have had a Bible reading, you will have a prayer, and these are what word people latch into. And then the second one is emotion, and bear in mind this is from across the pond, so it's not, emotion can sound quite negative, but actually this is a real positive. So these are the people who like to look at something, who like to hear music, who relate very well to each other, who actually, if, will access their spirituality probably through talking with other people and being with other people. Excuse me. And then you get what he calls the symbol people. Now it's the symbol people who like silence. And these are the ones who traditionally are really missed out in collective worship. They may well have turned off before they even sat down, before the thing started, because they think, oh, it's just going to be loads of words. Symbol people are much more what I would call mystical. So whenever I talk about this in schools, teachers know exactly the child in their class who is like this. They're the ones who are often described as old before their time. They may be introverted and they're not as bothered about being infinitely popular, because they'll have 2 or 3 really trusted friends. But they're children whose interior life is enormous, but they don't talk about it that much. They're often the last people to put forward an idea. But once you've located which child that is, they often have the best idea, because it's taken them a long time to get there and they need to get it right. So the symbol children are the ones who, if you light a candle, they at least can access their inner self through looking at the candle. It's as simple as that. They love to be outside. So be brave and have some collective worship outside. There's no law that says you have to do it in the school hall. As long as it's on the school premises, you're ticking all the boxes. And the last group are the action group. And you see the action group in things like, let's have a bake sale, let's do this, let's do that. I want to do something to help people. And so in an act of collective worship, The trick to include them is to say, I wonder what difference this story, this thought will have for you today. How can you be the Good Samaritan? How can you actually, what ideas have you got that we can do this thing together? And then the action people can join in. Because it's not just the kids who are like this, it's adults as well. So if a word person sits through an act of worship, which is nothing but what we call worship songs, unless the lyrics are really good, and they're not always that good with worship songs, we tend to get, a bit more carried away with how it makes you feel, then, they won't have any access to the worship either. They'll just find it isolating. Symbol people like some silence, so the whole school can experience some silence. Those of us like you, Ryan, and me, who sit and fidget in a silent bit, can learn. You can learn how to do it, and in fact, as you get older, it seems to become easier. She said, from her vantage. But it's really important to recognise that in the same way that no two people learn in the same way, so no two people experience their spirituality. And if I'm leading collective worship, I'm leading it for me, because that's how you do it. And if you're leading collective worship, you're leading it for you. And the trick, I believe, in Dave Sinos' work is to think, well, that bit's okay for me. How am I including all the others? Because if you're not including everybody, then, why are we here? It needs to be really, really inclusive. And if you do include all the spiritual styles, then the children who sit outside of the Anglican fellowship, and that can be quite a lot in a village school, then they might find that they can access the worship and they can feed their spirituality, even if they wouldn't say amen at the end of the prayer.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much. I think Sinos' work there and that framework you so wonderfully described, I think that's really useful for us working in Church of England schools, because we're all about ensuring that collective worship is inspiring, it's invitational, but also it's inclusive.
Yes.
Yeah.
I in my latest book, Faith in Children, there's a chapter on spiritual styles, and whenever I do sessions on it, you can see pennies dropping everywhere as people recognize. And the other thing about children's spirituality is that it can be really surprising. There's a lovely lady called Kate Adams who works in Winchester, I think now, and she researched children who see angels. Now, I've never seen an angel. I doubt if you have, but children talk about seeing angels. And if a child talks to a teacher about seeing an angel, do we say, don't be so stupid? Or do we say, that's really interesting. I've never seen an angel. Tell me about it. And not say to the child that that was a hallucination or whatever you think it might be. I'd love to believe that children see angels. And if they do, I'd like to benefit from that. And I think that sort of sums up how children's spirituality can really speak to adults, because what happens is we lose the ability to see angels as we get older.
Well, thank you, Ronni. I think that's been really useful certainly in helping me to think more carefully about collective worship offers in schools, and that spirit process from Rebecca and I, and that word, emotion, symbol, action, I think could be really purposeful in helping us to reflect about our collective worship provision. And certainly it's something that I wish I heard when I was in the classroom, in thinking more about, okay, well, yeah, as you said, this works for me, but how can I make sure that this is working for the others in the class, and other staff members as well. So springboarding off from that, in thinking about supporting the spirituality or perhaps spiritual development of all within schools, is there any other advice or wisdom that you'd like to share?
I think there's the thing about not looking consciously, of not having a tick box of, yes, we've achieved that today, but living within the moment and the process. I think it might be an idea that if a child says something really special to a member of the staff, that you log it and keep a note, and maybe do that in the staff area so that the other adults can hear the comment and be encouraged by it. So there's that whole thing about encouraging the adults to be more open to what the children bring. And I think, especially in a school environment where there's always pressure to get more done, is stopping and pausing and just taking a moment. We do it when we have a prayer, maybe at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, but maybe include some silence as well, that you end with a prayer, and let the children actually take the time to go inside themselves and just be calm. I'm told that schools that practice a 5-minute meditation, that actually the standards go up and the behavior improves. So it's got all sorts of side benefits as well as the interior ones for the children. But just allow the children and recognize that, we don't think about our spirituality very much. Let's just take a few moments now. Let's pause, close our eyes, and just be still and see what happens.
Brilliant. I think that space to do that, I think, is wonderful. So thank you ever so much, Ronni. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Ryan.
Bye.